is being recorded.
So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Joe Armstrong. This is the January Power Systems Virtual User Group webinar. A couple of things. One, I am recording this session, so I'm not sure nobody else gets to talk except for really Jackie and I. So if you don't want to be on the recording, though, you can leave. Just a few things before we get started here. You know, technology is changing in the IT world so much. It has, I think, forever since we started having real IT, you know, PCs, the internet and everything. And lately cloud is blossoming, and now these days artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning is taking off like crazy, and it's going to be a real game changer. But with all that, we still have a lot of traditional workloads and a lot of ways that we traditionally do stuff. In the not so distant past, virtualization was a big thing, and VIO servers came along and really changed the way we configure systems. And I think for most of the clients that I work with, most data shops use virtualization. Most power systems have VIO servers running on them. And while it may seem like it's kind of old stuff, just about everybody has to deal with it. And so today, we're lucky to have Jackie Lynch helping us with care and feeding of VIO servers. And actually, Jackie is plunging two talks into one here for us, not just the care and feeding and maintenance and stuff like that, but backing up and things of VIO servers as well. So this will be a really good, I think, education on stuff that just about everybody has to use. So Jackie has been an IBM customer for many years, over 22 years. Then she worked for a couple of business partners, and now she's really an independent consultant on her own. So this is kind of a third-party talker. Most of the speakers really IBMers, and now you get to hear from somebody that's not an IBMer and her expertise. So she's worked with lots of different platforms, including mainframes and Unix systems, mid-range systems, and even personal workstations. But lately, she's really a power subject matter expert in just a number of different areas. And I know from experience that customers love her and like her expertise. So with that, we're going to get to Jackie. Just one thing before we do, the presentation materials that Jackie has shared are on the wiki site, the Power Systems Wiki site. I can put a link out for that. And I am recording this session. I'll put the replay out on the wiki site sometime after I can get it all formatted and uploaded and all that kind of stuff, but probably within a day or two. So I think that covers all my notes. With that, Jackie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, I guess good afternoon or good evening, depending on when. Just a note about the presentation handout. What I sent Joe last night, I found a couple of typos in this morning, so I will be sending him a new copy this afternoon. All right, well, with that said, pretty busy agenda. We're going to talk about some fundamentals before you start with VIO servers. We'll talk a little bit about Power VM 3.1, some of the prerequisites, how to install it, how to upgrade to it, and some of the maintenance things. And then, as we said, we'll cover backup and recovery. And I have a little bit of information on storage, particularly some of the NPIV stuff, networking and monitoring. There are a lot of slides in here, don't worry about it. At least 40 or 50 of them are what I would call backup slides, useful commands, useful links, and so on. So let's get right into it. One of the most important things for you to do is to stay current. And in case you weren't aware, if you're on any version less than 2.2.6 of your VIO server, you are out of support. All of the 2.2.5 stuff went out of support in November 2019. Everything prior to that went out of support December 2018. You don't want to be the person placing a call to IBM on a VIO problem and being told you need to do an upgrade. So it's really important that you start to plan for your migrations to version 3, because even version 2.2.6 goes out of support, and you can see here on September 30th, 2020. So these are all things to keep in mind. And the difference between these here, EOM is end of marketing. That's when they stop selling it. EOS is end of service. So sorry, the end of service for 226 is 2021. All right, so VIO server levels. As of November 9th, 2018, that was when VIO Server 3.1 came out. It immediately came out with a mini pack. Then in May 2019, it came out with .21. November, the next step, 3.11 and 3.11.10 came out. And basically, you download the bases, whether it's 3.10 or 3.11, you download those bases from ESS, and just be aware IBM has moved that site. So somebody's asking if I'm changing the slides because they can only see slide 1. I am changing the slides. Joe, can you see the new slides?
Yeah, the slides
Okay.
are changing on mine as well, Jackie.
Okay.
So there were some things about you speaking. It sounded like you upped your voice a little bit, so that's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, allergy season, so speaking up too loud. In terms of the patches or the service packs and fix packs, you download those from Fix Central. And then I have all the links in here for the release notes and so on. It is really important that you read those release notes. There are some very specific things in there about levels, etc. And you'll see down here, I have a note about reading the Red Book. So I'm going to give you an example of what to look for in the Red Book. If you look at this, this is the E980 Red Book. And if you go to the operating system support, it gives you the minimum AIX levels that you can run any I/O configuration, i.e. dedicated I/O or virtual, and then the minimum AIX levels if you're virtualizing your I/O. So it's really important that you make sure that your client operating systems are up to date in order to be able to run on that particular hardware. The same will apply with, they'll have VIO server levels, IBM I levels, Linux levels, and so on. So as an example, the minimum required level for an E980 is 22631 or later. I've seen a lot of people get into trouble where they've actually managed to install a VIO server that's not supported, but had horrible problems. So please make sure that when you're installing stuff that you are reading the READMEs and the Red Books. There is a hyper out right now for 3.11, and that hyper has to do with some I/O failures on certain fiber channel adapters. So if you're running a Power 9 with these fiber channel adapters and you upgrade your VIO server to 3.11, you must put these patches on. And Nigel just also put an entry in his AI expert site about this yesterday. But I do want you to make sure that if you're going to 3.11, you have this as one of the things to do. Anytime you're planning an install or an upgrade, it's good to go to the Flirt website and make sure that the levels that you're planning on putting together for the HMC, for your firmware, and so on are all going to work together. So let's talk about some of the prerequisites. The first thing is, if you're going to version 3, your NIM server for 3.10 has to be at AIX 72.3.3 if you want to use NIM to do anything with your VIO. Once you get to version 3.11, you have to be at AIX 7241. That's just your minimum NIM levels. And the page has not been updated yet to include the 3.110 stuff. Some of the changes in PowerVM 3.1. This is basically the move to AIX 7.2 for your VIO servers. And it includes a lot of things like native compatibility mode for Power 8, Power 9, a lot of LPM changes. One of the things that I was particularly excited about was the USB flash drive install. And don't confuse installing with backup and restore. IBM does not support backup and restore to and from a USB drive for a VIO server. It does for AIX, but not for a VIO server. However, you can download a flash image for a VIO server and install it from a USB flash drive. IVM is no longer supported, so you actually have to install VIO servers now. So you'll need to plan for enough memory, etc. for those. There's a lot of database changes. A lot of old packages got removed, so you don't need Java 6 anymore. You don't need Java 7 once you get to 3.10.20. A lot of changes like that. A lot of changes to multipathing and a lot of things related to iSCSI support. There isn't enough time to go into all of these, so I just wanted to sort of point a few of them out. Some of the prerequisites, you need at least 1 core per VIO, and I think you need at least 8 gig of memory. If you're using shared storage pools, Nigel recommends 16 gig. But this changes depending on how many high performance cards that you have. So the more 8 gig, 16 gig, 10 gig, 32 gig, etc. cards that you have, the more memory you'll need and the more core that you may need. I also always have 1 or 2 spare disks in my VIOs. I tend to, when I install a server, I tend to request 6 disks. 2 for root VG for each VIO, and then a third one that I use for file backed optical. And then when I'm doing maintenance, I break my mirror for root VG and I use that second disk to take a clone so that I have a very quick recovery. When you go to do the version 3 upgrade, if you're upgrading from version 2, you have to have a spare disk because it does an alternate disk install. So if you only have 1 disk in your VIO server, VG, you will need to add a second disk or you cannot do the upgrade. We covered all the stuff about NIM. The other thing about version 3.1 is it only supports Power 7 Plus, which is basically the D models and above, and it does not support any blades. So if you have old servers that you need to keep around, then you're going to want to run those at 226. The latest VIO is 51. The command that you use for the upgrade is either nim VIOS upgrade, which you use on nim, or VIOS upgrade on the VIO server. Either one of they have completely different syntax, so whichever one you pick, and I picked the VIOS upgrade on the VIO server. Either way, you have to be at a minimum of 2.2.6.30 on the VIO that you are upgrading. But if you have shared storage pools, you have to be at 226.32. So I made the decision to make sure all my VIOs were at 226.32 before I upgraded. And at that time, 32 was the highest level out there. That upgrade was very smooth, so 226.32 should be your minimum. In order to do the upgrades, obviously you have to have access to HMC, DVD drive, flash drive, or a NIM server, basically somewhere to load the code from. And if you're using a flash drive, it has to be at least 16 gig. This is a list of some of the important changes in shared storage pools. The most important thing to note is that when you're looking at the README, there is a whole section on shared storage pools on things that you have to take care of if you're using them. I don't tend to use them, but what I've done is I put a link down the bottom to Nigel Griffith's AI Expert blog, where he has written extensively on shared storage pools and on the upgrades. Just some general things, and this really applies to AIX, VIOs, everything that you do. Keep it simple. You can do some incredibly complex things with your VIO servers. You could have multiple networks, virtual network switches, multiple networks. You can do some incredibly complex things. The problem with that is that it's very, very hard to figure out when things go wrong. So my 2 caveats are I always try to keep it as simple as possible, and I document everything. I don't even start and install till I have pre-documented everything about the server, every slot that I'm going to use, where it's going to go, and so on. That saves me a lot of grief later on when I'm trying to remember what I did, because I work on a lot of systems, and why I did it. The LMB is the logical memory block size. It's also known as the memory region option, and that has to be the same on all servers if you want to use LPM. So that's something that you can see when you go into memory on the server, and it will tell you, I think it calls it the memory region option there, but you basically want that to be the same. It typically defaults to 256. You want to use hot pluggable adapters wherever possible, and also set the adapters to desired, not required. If you set adapters to required in a client LPAR, you cannot use LPM, and you also can't use hot plug replace. If you set them to required in a VIO server, LPM is not an issue because you don't LPM VIOs, but you can't do hot plug replaces. So you should just set them to desired. Always use dual VIO servers. even on small systems, because that lets you do concurrent updates. You can literally work on one VIO and update it, and then reboot that, and then work on the other one without taking an outage of all the clients. So you definitely want to have 2 VIO servers. And you also get, that all gets you redundancy. If you lose a hard drive, the other VIO, or a switch, the other VIO can take over. Another place I see people get caught is when they're setting up VLANs on trunk adapters. If the 2 VIO servers do not match, if you add a VLAN to one VIO's profile and don't add it to the other, and then you reactivate the VIO, it won't boot. So you need to make sure that if you're doing it through the profile, you need to have both VIOs shut down, add it to both VIOs, boot both. You can do it through the GUI with the enhanced interface, and it will add it to both VIOs. But just be aware that if they don't match, whichever VIO you try to boot second won't boot. A couple of other things on here. I don't need to go through all of this. The HMC scanner is your best friend. It does a really nice job documenting just about everything that you need. And then the last points about planning for an update a year. IBM usually puts out at least 2 updates per year for your VIOs. You should plan to do at least one of those. And then testing failover. You want to know whether SEA failover and disk failover works before you put a whole ton of production systems on that VIO. So when you're working with a VIO server, you want to use VIO commands wherever possible. Don't go into OEM setup env and use SMIT unless you have to. You want to make sure that you mirror root VG if it's on an internal disk, or at least take a clone of it so that you can reboot if necessary. By default, the paging on a VIO server is really messed up. It comes with a 512 meg HD6 and a 1.5 gig paging 00 on the same LUN. And one of the recommendations has always been you do not have 2 page spaces on the same LUN. On some systems, it comes with 2 1 gig page spaces. What I do is I delete paging 00 and I make HD6 4 or 6 or 8 gig. You're going to want to add logging. You're going to want to set up the dump devices properly because they're too small. And also you want to make sure that you run ERRPT regularly. If you don't check ERRPT, you're never going to pick up on disk problems and other things. A lot of people forget when they're planning their environments to back up their VIO servers. You can either use NIM to back them up, or I just have scripts that run automatically to my NIM server. My NIM server acts as an NFS server. It exports a backup directory, and on the 1st and 15th of the month, I back up my VIOs, or before I make a change and after. And the comment on entitlement is that your shared Ethernet adapter and networking is affected by entitlement, not by virtual processors. So if you're running at 100% of your entitlement all the time, then you are going to have some performance problems with your shared Ethernet adapter. In terms of sizing of VIO, I never use less than 8 gig of memory now with a VIO, if I can help it. And I usually do at least a full core minimum per VIO. But as I mentioned before, virtual fiber clients, which is your NPIV clients, and high performance adapters, take some memory and CPU. So if I look at the 10 or 8, 16, etc. gig adapters, every active port on those takes 512 mega memory. And then every VFC client that I define to the VIO needs another 140 meg. So you can add that up, and pretty quickly you can see that you could get to 2 to 3 gig of memory minimum for that. And then there's some links on VIO server sizing considerations that I have at the bottom. In terms of memory, and this is really more a server-based thing, but it does affect your VIOs. What a lot of people will do is if they have 100 gig in the server, they will set their max memory to 100 gig for every LPAR. Even though, like here, I have a 6 gig LPAR. The problem with doing that is that the server has to reserve memory for the hypervisor page tables because these are virtual memory LPARs. So it has to map real memory to physical memory real memory to virtual memory. And it matches it. It basically decides that it will use the maximum setting so that you don't have to reactivate if you want a DLPAR in memory and so on. So it assumes that you are going to get to that maximum. Therefore, you want to make that maximum something sensible. Otherwise, you could actually be holding a whole lot of memory that is not available to any LPAR, and for no reason. And at the back of the presentation, I've got a couple of spreadsheets examples, and the spreadsheet is available online for actually seeing how I actually figure out the memory. And this is just showing you, if you look, you see, and this is HMC Scanner, you see that my firmware gigabytes is 5.75 here. So that's the memory that's being held in firmware. Down here it's 23 and 38, but I have 28 and 39 LPARs. And the other thing that can affect your amount of memory that's being held is if you've got active memory mirroring turned on. If your server came with memory mirroring and it's turned on, then that means your whole hypervisor is mirrored, so it takes twice as much memory as normal. These are just things to keep in mind. All right, we're going to move on to installation. So the first thing you have to do is get the files to upgrade. And the examples I've got in here are going to 310. The information I've given you on the downloads is 311 because that's really where you're going to go. So the latest ISO download is 3110, which you go to ESS to get. And this is the new link just here for getting to ESS. They've actually moved it from here. And of course, you just get a 404 error. The flash image is 31110, and you get that from Fix Central. So you'll typically go to ESS, sign in, go to AIX, and go to your software downloads, and then you'll be given the choice of downloading. As you scroll down, you'll find Power VM version 3. Make sure you're looking at version 3. And you've got 3 ISO images. These two here are the base 3110, and this one here is the flash image. So I download all 3, but I nearly always use the flash image. So basically you download them, and then you've got options for your installs. You could do a fresh, if it's a new server, you're going to be doing a fresh install. You can also do a fresh install on an old server, and if you're going to do that, then you're going to want to LPM off the LPARs if you can. I've actually done an upgrade with all the LPARs still running. Fresh installs I'm a little bit more cautious with. You can install from DVD or USB, or you can use NIM to do the install to an alternate disk. Most of what I have been doing has been either fresh installs where I've loaded the image to the HMC and installed from there. I've also done the install from a USB, and I've done a lot of the upgrades. So the upgrades, I'm assuming that you're at least 22632, and you can use NIM VIOS upgrade, or what I've been using mostly has been the VIO server VIOS upgrade right on the VIO server. And again, make sure you read the README. The README is really important. It gives you a lot of information. As an example, this is the README for the fix pack for 31110. It actually tells you what the minimum level you have to be at before you can upgrade to 31110. So here it says, once I get my VIO to 310, I can then put this fix pack on. It is important that you read that README. In terms of doing a fresh install, it's no different to any other VIO server fresh install. You're basically just installing onto some disk, and then you do your custom configurations afterwards. If you're replacing a current VIO server, I always use VIO SBR to back up all my metadata, and I copy those to a remote system. Now the VIOS upgrade will do that, well, it will do the backup, but I like to have a copy either on my desktop or somewhere else just in case something goes wrong. Anything that you have outside of root VG, you should try to back up. and then obviously you should back up the VIO server or take a clone. The VIOS upgrade to version 3 does actually take a clone, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is using VIOS BR. I'm checking on my backups. So they actually go into home at padmin config backups. And you can see here that I have 3 of them. And then when I do a view list, it shows me the same ones that I had above. What I like about the LS is I get dates and so on. I have mine set up to run every day, so I don't have to think about it. And basically, if you run this VIOS BR command, what it's saying is, I want you to create a backup every day of all my metadata and keep the last 7 copies. And then after you've run that command, if you run a cron tab-l as root, you should see this command sitting in cron tab, and it's going to create a backup with a name vios name.01.tar.gz, vios name.02.tar.gz, etc. So prior to the installation or upgrade, as I said, you've got to back up everything outside of root VG. Some people still use logical volumes for clients. If you're using logical volumes for clients and you have them in root VG, they will not be backed up. And VIOS upgrade will not copy them across, so you need to back them up. If they're in a different volume group, then you should be fine. If you need to migrate them out of root VG before you do the upgrade, there's a link here which shows you, which gives you all the information about how to move logical volumes and file systems to another disk. You want to back up the VIO server. Even though I know I'm going to be working on a clone, I still back it up. And you'll notice in here that I'm unmounting /var/vio/vm library. If you're using fileback.optical, which is known as the media repository, there's been some bugs in the backup iOS command, so that even if you specify -no media lib, and even if it's in a different volume group, it seems to back it up and makes for these massive makes-SBs. So what I do is I unmount it, run my backup, and remount it, and then I know I'm never going to get that problem. So one of the things you might want to do when you're working on your VIO servers is when you're working on the primary network one, you might want to cause it to fail over to the secondary, just so that while you're working on it, the secondary is handling all the traffic. And the way that you can do that is you can use this chdev command, and let's say the SEA is on ENT10, you can use the chdev command and say, put me in standby. Then you log on to the secondary VIO and make sure that it becomes primary. Once that's done, you go do all your updates, do your reboot, and then put your primary VIO back into auto. You don't have to do that, but I tend to do it because then I've got a little bit more control and I know what's happening. Other thing that you have to be aware of is that if you want to install a VIO server from your HMC or from NIM, and actually this applies to AIX LPAS as well, if the physical ports connected are aggregated, i.e. LACP or standard, cannot do the install. It can only be, network installs are only supported over an access port connection. This is why a lot of people, when they have those 4-port cards that have 2 10 gig and 2 1 gig ports, will take one of those 1 gig ports and just put an IP on that, and that's their maintenance or management IP. And it never gets aggregated. And then the ports coming into the SEA, they aggregate. Just be aware that you need to have an access port to do network installs. And then I just have a note on if you're installing onto SanDisks, most of my clients install on internal disks, but sometimes when you've got multiple VIOs, you'll be installing to SanDisks. When you do that, you may need to light up the adapters for the zoning and mapping. I have some stuff on that later. Okay, so for DVD or USB complete installs, this is some of the notes on with links on how to do that, minimum levels and so on. And basically, you're going to boot in SMS mode and then tell it to boot from the DVD, the flash, the NIM, or the HMC, whichever it's going to be. Now, with the Power 9s, the USB is going to be an external USB that may or may not come with your server. What I've been telling people is when you buy a Power 9, just make sure they include the little external USB, because if you ever want to install from USB, you need to actually, from DVD, you need to actually add a DVD drive. And it's the same with the new HMCs as well. Be aware of that. If you want to use the HMC, then you're going to need to import the VIO server images to the HMC. So all I'm showing you here is some of the GUI things so that you can actually see it, because I couldn't find it documented anywhere. Basically, you're going to go to your virtual IO server repository and you'll tell it that you want to import a VIO server image. Give it a name. Tell it the file. In my case, I told it to go to a remote SFTP server, and I actually SFTP'd to one of my LPARs. I told it what directory the file was in, and then under resource 1 is the name of the image, the ISO image, which was my Flash 31021 ISO image, which is a single DVD. If you want to use the base image, that 3100, then you need to put the names in resource 1 and resource 2. Then builds the image for you, and it's sitting there. You can use that to install. I've had a lot of issues installing from the HMC, and it's mostly all around networking. So wherever possible, I try to just do either a DVD or a USB install. So I got a couple of slides on VIO server and NIM. And actually down the bottom here, there's an article I just published on using NIM with VIO servers. So in order to use, you can use NIM to back up, install, and update your VIO server, but there's some things you need to be aware of. First of all, there is no LPP source. Basically take the makesysb image that comes on the DVD for the VIO server, and you create a spot from that. And you never ever update that spot from an LPP source. That's one of the quickest ways to break your VIO server. If you're using the Flash ISO, it turns out that you can mount it on AIX using loop mount, but you can't mount it as a CDFS, which is what we normally mount ISO images as. It's actually in a different format, so you have to use UDFS. So just keep that in mind. You can also just mount it on your Windows system, extract the makesysb, and then upload it. But it does mount as UDFS. Then we go through the standard NIM stuff, add the partition, copy the makesysb image to the NIM master. If you do decide to use the base media, across those two DVDs, there are 3 makesysb images. And at the end of all this, you have to copy those out and concatenate them. Or use the flash image because there's just one makesysb. And I ran into problems using the 3 images. I didn't concatenate them properly, and I'll show you the error message that I got. Basically, I just did not get it right. So I went back and I used the flash image. The rest of this is NIM, motherhood, and apple pie. You define your makesysb, you define your spot. And I've got the commands here where you can see I'm defining my spot, server master with the makesysb image, etc. And then check it. The other thing is that on the VIO server DVD, there is a bosinst.data, and you should copy that and create a bosinst resource, which I always call VIOS bosinst. Allocate them to the VIO LPAR and set it up to do a bosinst install of type makesysb. And then it will go and do that. Pretty straightforward. Now, when you're installing VIOs, you can go through the same process twice, or if you have a split backplane and your disks are evenly split across the backplanes, you can actually do the basic build of VIO1, customize it, etc., and then you can clone it to the disks on the other side of the backplane and build VIO, and then VIO2 is built. So you might save yourself 3 or 4 hours doing that. And the way you do it is you put both adapters into VIO1. So let's say we have HDisk 0 and 1 on one side of the backplane, 2 and 3 on the other. We install VIO1 and customize it, etc. And then we use Alt Disk Copy to copy it to HDisk 2. And the -B tells it not to change the boot list, but you should still check it. You then export alt-inst root.vg, which is HDisk2, remove the definitions for the disks from VIO1, and shut it down, then remove the resources. Then you can activate VIO2 and clean it up. It's best to do this if you're going to take a clone before you add the network and fiber adapters, otherwise you've got a lot more to clean up. I've had success doing this where I had to do a DVD install and the DVD didn't float. So I had to install one VIO and copy it. So it's just another tool in your arsenal. However, if you don't do the following steps after cloning, you have RMC issues. And this can apply with your cloning AIX systems as well. So the first thing you got to do is stop RSCT, and then you have to clear the node ID on, this is on VIO2, and generate a new node ID. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll have VIO2 up and it's got RMC connections. And then if you boot VIO1, VIO2's RMC connections go down. And it's like a yo-yo, and it's really annoying. So this is the process for doing that. And then, of course, you have to clean up all the resources if you screwed up like I did and had the adapters in there. I had to remove all the Ethernet adapters and so on. So it is a process that works really well. If you have a situation where you have a DVD that you can assign to one VIO and you don't have any other option for doing the installs. All right. So we're going to talk about maintenance and upgrades. There's some things that you have to do before you can do an upgrade. Is to make sure that no one is using file-backed optical devices. So you run an LSP op to make sure no one has anything mounted. If you are using NPIV tape drives, you have to make sure that they're not in use. And if you're using IBMI, you have to make sure that they are deactivated on the IBMI LPARs. I have a process I use where I always upgrade my HMC first, and then my firmware, and then my VIO servers, and then AIX. But you need to read the readmes, because as an example, if you're putting the latest firmware on Power 9, which is 940, it requires that all of the IO adapters that are being used for booting have to be updated to the latest level. And that's because there's a new secure boot function in firmware 940. So in this case, you would update your firmware, you would update your IO adapter firmware, or you put the firmware on to the server. Now, in all cases, any new firmware level typically requires the HMC to be updated, and that's true here. So there's no, you could go to firmware, you could go to the HMC 940 now without touching your firmware or IO adapters. Just make sure that you double check with all of your readmes. I always check cross compatibility with FLIRT. I read the readmes, and then on my VIOs I run ERRPT. And what I'm looking for is, are there stale partitions? Are there missing paths or disks? Are there any problems with that VIO server? Because if there's problems with it, I want to fix those before I do an update. Updating something that's already broken doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the other thing is you want to make sure that all the paths on the clients are redundant, so that your LPARs will stay up. Hopefully this is something you tested when you actually installed the system. Making sure that every LPAR has disk zoned and mapped from each VIO, making sure that the SCA is actually working and failing over properly, and so on. So I run HMC scanner, and even though I know I'm working on a clone, I still back up the VIO server. So, and the other thing I do is the make_sysb image that I'm going to do the upgrade from, I copy it locally onto the VIO. That way, if there's a network glitch in the middle of my upgrade, I don't have a failure. So I keep all of this stuff on an NFS mount from my NIM server, but for the upgrade process, I copy it locally, do the upgrade with it locally, and then I delete the make_sysb off the VIO. You do your first VIO server. I usually pick my secondary network VIO server to do first because it's not carrying any network traffic. And Then once that's back up, I log on to a few LPARs, make sure that they've got all their paths back, and then I do the second VIO. And I always do them on the same day. All right, it's important to understand, going from version 2 to version 3 is an upgrade, not an update. You cannot use update VIOS. You have to use upgrade VIOS, or VIOS upgrade. I always create a file called files-to-save.txt and /home/padmin, and that has in it a list of critical files that I want to have saved. What it will do is when it does the upgrade, it will actually copy those files into /home/padmin/backup files. And so you can so that after the reboot, if you need to restore any of those files or copy things out of those files, you're not having to go back to the old copy to get them. As I said, I back up the VIO. If you're going to take an alt disk copy, you'll have to rename the clone, because alt inst root VG cannot exist while the upgrade's going on, because it creates its own. Do whatever you need to do according to the README for SSPs if you use them. Perform the post-upgrade SSP steps. Now, someone's asking how the process differs if both VIO servers are active. There's no primary-secondary relationship. Are you talking about VIO load balancing? SEA? Normally people have two VIOs and there is a primary-secondary relationship. But sometimes they'll have half of the network running primary on one VIO and half of the network running primary on the secondary, in which case the process doesn't really differ. So we then go and we perform the upgrade, we restore the metadata, which the upgrade should do for you, but you still want to check that it did. You know, like, so run a ls map -all -mpiv kind of thing. Restore anything that was outside of root VG if we have to. Perform our post-upgrade steps, and again, we make sure that there's no MPIV or virtual optical stuff. At this point, you have basically a vanilla AIX, a VIO 311 installation. None of your regular customizations beyond the virtual stuff will have been done. So if you've changed logging, if you've installed some third-party backup software or anything like that, none of that will be there. So you need to go through and do all those customizations. Now, this is an example of my files-to-save.txt file. Yours will probably be different, but anywhere that I've done any kind of customizations, its environment, its group hosts, inetd.conf, whatever, I put all those in there so that it copies them over for me, so that I don't have to, as I said, go find them on the old copy. And they get saved to /home/padmin/backup_files. Put in there whatever files you need. All right, so to do the upgrade, first you have to find an empty disk. So this is all done as padmin. So I do my LSPV and I notice that HDisk3 is my alt inst root VG. I can actually tell it to tell me the size of the disks, so I can make sure they're big enough. Then I ran a LSPV-unused and an LSPV-free and I got nothing back. So obviously I need to free up a disk to use. Now I also do an ls map -all, and I do a grep on HDisk to make sure that none of the HDisks that I'm planning on potentially using are actually mapped to a client using vSCSI, because the last thing I want to do is overwrite an HDisk that I've used vSCSI and assigned to someone as their root VG. This is where your documentation comes in very handy if you're using vSCSI. You need to know every disk that's assigned to somebody and which ones are free. Now, the first time I did the VIO server upgrade, I forgot to clear my HDisk3. I had exported the alt inst root VG, but I didn't realize that the volume group still left a little thread there that said that a volume group had owned it. So what I got was this error message that said provided disk HDisk3 is in use. So I go back, run my LSPV-free, etc. And basically what I had to do was clean it all up. So you can export alt inst root VG and import it with a new name, or you can use alt root VG op to just rename it. Or in my case, I deleted it. And I used alt root VG op dash capital X Alternate through VG. So I basically cleared the disk so that it had nothing, didn't have a volume group on it. And the recommended method is really not to do the export, import, etc. It's really to use alt root VG op. And I've got the link down the bottom there on how to use it. Right. Now, just because it showed it wasn't in a volume group didn't mean it was available. So if I did that LSPV-free or unew, it wasn't going to show it to me as free. So the CHPV with a dash capital C actually clears the owning volume manager from the disk. And then just for completeness, I did the lowercase c to clear the boot image off it. So now it shows with an LSPV as none. When I do an LSPV-free, it shows as available. Now I can actually do the upgrade. So first thing is to run an update iOS-commit and check your iOS levels, etc. Make sure there's no efix data on the system. So whether you run emanager-L or emanager-P. Efixes can cause you a problem. Right, so we've already downloaded the code and we've basically copied that makesysp image. In my case, I copied it into user local soft PowerVM 31110. Like I said earlier, I copy them locally just in case. I also copy down the Java, SSH, SSL, and IO adapters and make sure they're all there as well, so that I can do everything. So that I can do everything at the same time. So what does the command actually do? Now the example I've got here is for my 31021 upgrade, because I upgraded all my VIOs to that, and I'm doing the 31110 upgrades, but they're different from going, obviously going from version 3.1 to a 3.1 subset is different to doing 22632 to 3.1. So I thought this was the more important example to give you. Basically, the first step is that it actually does a VIOSBR update, a backup. So it does update all the virtuals. It then goes and builds your VIO 31021 environment on the new disk. Migrates the configuration, so that's where it restores the VIOSBR stuff. Sets the boot list, and then it will then reboot, and you get a warning that says 60 seconds, and I'm going to reboot. So you can stop it with Control C if you want to. Typically, I don't recommend that. I actually did it because when I was doing this, I was doing some testing and I wanted to see what happened. So I can take you through that. And then the command I used was the VIOS upgrade. This is on the VIO server. And it's a dash L, which is for local node installation. Then a dash I where I pointed to my makesysp image. And notice I'm using the flash image. And I'm telling it to put it on HDisk3. And I'm pointing it at my files to save file. There is one other option, which is the dash C. So if you're part of an SSP cluster, you need to specify the dash C as well. So my first attempt failed. And basically the reason it failed was this is where I had taken the 2 base image DVDs and I'd concatenated the 3 images and I got it wrong. And so what I got was an unpacking error. So I wanted to show you this so that if you get this unpacking error with a decode failure, and the annoying thing was it failed on a different, I did it a couple of times before I realized, and it failed on a different file set each time. So that's when I went and got the single makesysp from the flash and decided to just do that. So this is the successful upgrade, and I apologize for the eye chart. It basically goes through, it welcomes you, it tells you what it's doing. Then at the end, you'll start to see the forced unmounts, just like with an alternate disk install, because that's what it's doing. Then you get the message, the VIO will be rebooted after 60 seconds from the new disk. Press Control C to terminate. Some other messages. And then, as I said, in this particular case, I hit Control C because I was outside my maintenance window. So I also wanted to see what it had done. So I run the VIOS upgrade -L-Q and it's telling me that it started and triggered and it's showing me the backups, so on. Then I went and then in my maintenance window, because I was holding off on the reboot, when I looked at my boot list, it had set the boot list to the new disk, so I put it back the old way. I did not want to accidentally reboot the copy. Then I went and ran the whole thing again. I deleted the alt inst root VG that I had just created, and during my maintenance window I reran it, and it went and rebooted from the alternate disk. Now, one of the things that I got caught by that I wasn't aware is there's at least a couple of reboots that it does. So it does the first reboot, and then if you're like me and you're impatient, you see that login prompt and you immediately log in. Then it does another reboot on you because it's doing all the restores of the virtual. So after that first reboot, I just suggest you wait 10 minutes. It'll do a couple of reboots. Then you log in, and you'll have to change your password, accept the license, and you can do the VIOS upgrade-L-Q, check what happened, and run all your post-upgrade checks. So this is just showing you the start of the trigger to the restore is the VIOS BR restoring all your virtuals. After the upgrade, you'll run iOS level, I always still do OS level -S, and I make sure there's no missing file sets. 3.1 is really clean. I've done upgrades, I've done installs for VIO 226 and ended up with a lot of missing file sets and so on that I've had to clean up. I haven't seen any of that with version 3.1. Actually, a really nice clean install. 3.10.10 is actually AIX 7232. You get to 3.11.10, you'll actually see that it's AIX 7241. Right, so now I basically do any customizations. Like I tend to add a user local logs and do all my logging to that. I like to use VI, so I tend to export editor VI out of its environment, and also rerunning all my tunables because I do some tuning. Then I actually go and I do some other additional things. So as an example, the Java levels that are installed are back level, and they have known security holes. The same with SSH and SSL. So I download those and get those installed. Once you're at 3.10.20, you no longer need Java 7. As of 2.2.6, you no longer need Java 6. So you can actually remove those. And I do. So these are the patched levels that was showing after I did my updates for Java 7, Java 8, and OpenSSH and SSL. And you're probably going to be around 1800 for SSH and SSL, which have some pretty big security holes. You do want to patch those. The way you patch them is you basically get SSH and SSL from the web download pack, which of course has moved. And I untar all the files for the Java, SSH, SSL into one directory. And then I use update iOS to apply them. So if you do them all, there's 96 to go on. If you just put the Java 8 stuff in the directory, there's more like about 7 or 8 to go on. So there are also additional patches that have to go on. There are some known bugs with AIX 723 and 7241, and there are some known VIO server patches that need to go on. So typically what I do when I'm done is I run flirt VC, and I then go and download and install any iFixes, etc. that I need. I usually run them with the -P flag first, which says run it in preview mode, and then I run it for real if it's successful. If you run that before you update Java and SSH and SSL, you're going to get a lot of errors. So as of 3.10.21, there were 3 patches that were needed. And I have those listed here. Now those may have changed, because that was in October 2019. 3.1.10, there are actually 4 patches. There's one to BOSNet TCP dump, there's one for SSPs, and then these 2 here. If you remember right at the beginning, I talked about the fact that VIO Server 3.1.1 had a couple of hypers for fiber adapters. Those are the patches for them. What Flirt VC does that's nice is it gives you all this information. Once you're to the bulletin, it tells you where to download it, and it tells you if a reboot is required for the patch. It also tells you where it's fixed. So it's telling me that it's fixed. One of them is fixed in 31120. Well, that's not very helpful because 31120 is not out. So basically, it gives you the iFixes. You may also want to set up NTP. Normally, when you set up NTP on AIX, you go into /etc/ntp.conf. On the VIO server, it actually uses /home/padmin/config/ntp.conf. This is an example using the international TP pool servers, but basically you can change those server numbers to whatever you use locally for NTP if you have NTP. And then you'll notice down the bottom with the start source command, it has a flag of the -C and it points to a different config file. So be aware of that. In terms of tunables that I set on my VIO servers, by default the network's not tuned, so I always use the NO. I always tune the TCP send and receive and UDP send and receive RFC 1323. I also will change the max transfer size and num command alums on each of the fiber adapters. And I usually bump max free just a little bit so I have a little bit more wiggle room if I start to run short on memory. So this is typically where I start. The disk ones down the bottom, the fiber adapters, that's going to be dependent on your disk subsystem. So just be aware of that. I also tune the virtual buffers. As of AIX7, there was a change made to the buffer mode to be min-max. What that means is that the virtual buffers on your virtual adapters have their minimum level set to their maximum level. And the issue with that is then you can never tell if you're actually running out of them. Because when you look at a netstat output or an entstat output, it always shows that min equals max allocated. And you could be using 20 buffers, but it's always going to show that you're using 4096. So I tend to have my min and my max be slightly different values. And the only way that you can do that is if you change the buffer mode to min, which was what it used to be. So I always change that back. I'll leave that up to you to decide whether or not you want to do that. In terms of post-install checks, I then go and run iOS level. I also do OS level minus SQ showing me the latest service packs, and I take the top one. I run my OS level minus S, I make sure it matches the top one. And I also make sure with the OS level minus S minus L, with that top one, I make sure that I'm not missing any file sets. There's a couple of schools of thoughts on this. Some people, sorry, I did this in the wrong place. Some people don't prefer not to fix missing file sets. What I've found historically is that if I don't fix missing file sets over time, they build up and things get really, really ugly. So I tend to fix them up front. I like having a nice, clean system. I'll also run the instafix command to make sure I'm not missing anything. And most of these I want to have come back with nothing. My ERRPT, pretty much the only thing I want to see it come back with is the information from boot and the fact that it became primary or secondary when I came. So once everything's good to go and my LPARs have all their paths back, then I go upgrade VIO 1. Now remember that if you've done anything like cleaning up inetd.conf or any other files, you're going to have to do that again. And again, take a backup when you're done. In terms of log files, when you're doing a VIOS upgrade, there are a number of log files that you can look at. I've listed them here so that you actually have them. I don't have any examples of VIOS upgrade problems at version 3, so the example I'm going to use is from 22632, where I ran an OS level and it came back as 6100-00. It did not come back with a valid number. And so when I ran the instafix, it told me there were some missing file sets. So again, we ran the OS level minus SQ, and we saw 6100-0911-1810. When I ran it with the level, sorry, My mouse seems to be very sensitive today. When I ran it with the level, it basically told me what file sets were, what actual level they were at, and what they should be at. So I have a choice of removing them, updating them, or that's basically the two choices. You don't use SMIDI. A lot of people will just try to force this through with SMIDI. What I do is I use update iOS. So I either use update iOS to remove it, or I put the missing file sets and only those missing file sets, so the updates for BOS alt disk etc., and I put them into a directory called missing, and I'll do an update iOS from there. That's the cleanest way to do it. We do all the checks again. Right, we're in the tail end. So I mentioned early on that you can install VIO Server 3.1 from a USB stick. This has led to a lot of confusion where people think that you can back it up to a USB stick and you can restore it from a USB stick. This is IBM's support page for backups and restores. Do not see USB stick on there. And I actually opened a PMR on that, and IBM came back and said, no, we do not support backup and restore from a USB stick. Now, I'm not telling you that it doesn't work, I'm just telling you it is not supported. So be aware of that. You need to have a backup strategy where, in my case, I just always back up to my NIM server. And I back up everything on the NIM server to some external media. So in order to back it up, use the backup iOS command. There's a variety of different flavors of it. Primarily, you're going to run one of two types of backups. One that creates a NIM resources tar package that you can then load to the HMC if you want to do an install iOS from the HMC. The other one that creates a pure makes this B image. I always do both. That way I have maximum flexibility as to how I do my backups and restores. Before I do a backup, I always run a VIOS BR, even though I run them daily. And sometimes I'll run a snap as well, so that if anything, if I need it, I've got the snap information. I have a directory on my NFS server called /backups that I export to all my. So I mount that, create a directory for that VIO server. Off I go. So the backups, there's an example of me running it after I run OEM setup end. So I'll run, this is the backup. Basically, I do my VIOS BR, then I run my backup, which is the makes this B image, so on. And then the next one down, where I say if using NIM, that's where I run the one that creates the resources file. What I tend to do when I'm doing updates is I will simply just take a clone of my root VG disk. That way, if my update fails, I can just boot from the saved disk. Once you get to version 3, that's how I do all my failbacks. So down the bottom, see here where I have the VIO2 dir as a directory. So here I'm upgrading my VIO2. Sorry, I'm backing up my VIO2, and I'm doing both kinds of backups. I always unmount the VM library, which is the filebacked optical library. The reason that I do that is because I've just had too many instances where it has, even though I've told it no media, it's ignored them. It may have been fixed in version 3, I haven't tested it, but it certainly was a problem in 2.2.6. So I just unmount it. And I run my backups and then I remount it. I noticed that 2.2.6.32, my backups were around 19 gig, but during the backup process, the file system needed as much as 32 to 40 gig free. And I think a lot of that was basically because at the end it does a compress of the tar files. So just be aware that you need to make sure you have plenty of spare disk in the file system that you're backing up to. All right, we've already seen an example of checking the virtual backup, but you can actually do it using LS, or you can do the VIOS BR-view to make sure it was taken. Now, one of the things I do with my VIO servers is I tend to run a script that documents what I've got in my VIO servers. So that's my VIO, my save-VIO stuff.shell. You should have a script that you run regularly that just documents how things are configured on your VIOs, or run the HMC scanner. I run the HMC scanner before and after any updates I make to the system, whether it's a VIO server upgrade, an AIX upgrade, or whatever, so that I can actually see what got changed and make sure that I didn't break anything. I am big on documentation, and I'm very big on reading, and so on. When I was a lot younger, I didn't used to be. So this is just showing you the files. They're just a bunch of text files that you can go look at. This is the backup script that I throw in cron, and I have it run on the 1st and the 15th of the month typically. It's not particularly smart. It does my backups. Hey. So I'm going to go really quickly through storage and a little bit on the network. I've only got about, 20 minutes left, Joe? So,
hey, Jackie, could you speak up a little bit? Kind of fading out there.
Sorry. My voice is getting tired.
Yeah, I'm getting towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to very quickly cover some storage and networking things, and then we'll talk about monitoring, and then we'll be done. So basically, there's two options for storage. I'm going to leave the whole issue of logical volumes out. We typically have either the vSCSI model or the NPIV model. With vSCSI, the VIO server owns all the disks, and you then assign them to the LPARs. With NPIV, it's a pass-through mechanism. So everything gets passed through to the LPAR, and the LPAR takes care of managing the disks. And there are some performance differences, because obviously if the VIO server has to handle the H disks as it does in vSCSI, that's going to have more of a performance implication than NPIV. Additionally, with vSCSI, the VIO server can see those disks and technically got them. NPIV it can't. So the thing to understand is there's two terms that you'll hear storage people use, zoning and mapping. And people get them confused. So zoning is when you go to the switch and you tell the switch port how to talk to the storage and how to talk to the LPAR. So you'll typically zone worldwide numbers, which is the physical port addresses for the storage subsystem. And you'll also zone the worldwide port numbers for the LPAR if you're using NPIV, or if you're using vSCSI, it's the worldwide numbers. Well, what's the difference between them? The worldwide port numbers are going to be the ones that are specific to the LPAR, so you get those out of the LPAR profile. If you're using vSCSI and the VIO is zoning everything, then you have to zone the real adapters on the VIO server. So those are what I call the WWNs. And then we do mapping, where the storage gets updated to say which worldwide port numbers or worldwide numbers can actually access the storage. And you have to do both. If you don't do both, you don't have access to the storage. So for direct attach, we zone and map WWNs for real adapters. For NPIV, it's the worldwide port numbers. Some storage subsystems, and this is new on the V5000 actually, require that you also zone real adapters. This has only just started happening in the last couple of months. Prior to that, you didn't have to zone them. Now you do. Worldwide numbers, which is the real ones, tend to start with a 10 or a 20. Worldwide port numbers, which are the virtual ones that you see in the client profile, start with a C0. You can find these in an HMC scanner report or by logging onto the LPAR or the VIO. On the VIO, you could find the real ones by using the LSCFG-VPL. So it's important to understand just the distinction. Zoning is at the switch, mapping is at the storage. The other thing to understand with NPIV is when I create a client LPAR and I define its virtual fiber adapters, it actually gets two worldwide port numbers for that one port. And the first one is the one it normally uses. If you are using LPM, it will it requires that second one. And what LPM does is when I LPM to another server, it will boot off that second worldwide port number. If I LPM again, it goes back to the first one. So, but if I do an active LPM, it stays on the first. So pretty much if you're doing LPM, you must zone and map both worldwide port numbers, even though one of them will never light up. Only one of them's lit up at a time. And I've had issues where they weren't mapped at the storage, and when we did an LPM, it actually damaged the boot image, because it turns out the boot image is in the firmware. Very, very careful. There are some parameters that you can set on the VIOS LPM 0 if you do an LS adder on it that actually allow you to avoid this problem, because it does an end-to-end check to make sure it can see every disk. So this is basically just reiterating everything that I just said about vSCSI and MPIO, and NPIV. MPIO drivers are installed in the VIO if you're using vSCSI. They're installed in the clients if you're using NPIO. If you want to find the WWPNs on the HMC, you can look at the client, you look at the fiber channel adapter, and you can see here that adapter 70. And this is on the client LPAR, it is not on the VIO. See that I have two WWPNs ending 28 and 29. So I always call the first one the normal one, the second one the LPM one. Just be aware that in an LPM environment you need both. And this is what I was saying before about how it flip-flops between those two WWPMs. There's a lot of different ways you can force those MPIV ports to log in. One is to log into the HMC and use the in-port login. And sometimes you have to do this because the storage admins will not zone or map unless you light up the ports. There's actually an easier way to do it that I like more, which is you go to the HMC and bring up the GUI, and you go to the profile, you go to the virtual adapter, and just pick any virtual adapter, and then you can go into advanced and check all the virtual adapters, go to actions advanced and log in, log out. So you can tell it to log in all of the WWPNs. They should then see them, they can do their zoning and mapping, and then you can log them back out. And that's what you may have to do when you're doing before you boot the LPAR, because they've obviously got to give you some storage to install to. The other thing about zoning with LPM is people get really complicated with their zoning. So they want to zone literally by fiber adapter. Well, that's fine when you've got real physical adapters being zoned. The problem is when I start to look at the fact that I've got a virtual client, it's using virtual fiber adapters. I don't have as granular a control as I would like to have over which fiber adapters they go to. And when I'm LPMing, things get really messed up. You need to keep your zoning simple. So whatever works for you, but I do not zone by adapter. I tend to have a zone entry for the LPAR, and in it I have of my virtual adapters that I got out of my profile. I will then have the two ports from my storage subsystem that go to that switch, and then I might have like a tape drive unit. So if you look at these, you'll see that the only difference is the ones that start with a 50, which are my storage subsystem, and the ones that start with 10 and 20, which are my tapes. I have all my virtuals in both switches. And yes, that does mean that they will sometimes show as degraded, but it's a lot easier than trying to figure out when I do an LPM if I get it wrong. The other thing you'll find with those 10 gig, 1 gig hybrid cards is that you've got two 10 gig and two 1 gig ports, and they show as the extra ones will show sometimes as fiber adapters. And they will get a lot of errors because they're not connected to anything. So if you're not going to put wrap plugs in them, you can actually change them to unconfigured so that you stop getting the error messages. I just put an example of that in there. All right, a couple of comments on HBA settings. By default, your HBAs are not really tuned for performance. So I tend to increase my num command alums, which is the number of outstanding IOs. Think of that as like queue depth for the adapter. And there's another one called max transfer size, which is the direct memory access region for the fiber adapters. So, and by default, they're set to 0x100000, and I think num command alums is 200. Your VIO server must be higher than any of your clients. So you should always set your VIO server first and reboot it. And make sure you've done it with both of them before you touch any of the clients. Up until at AIX 7.1, they made a change so that on the clients, this is your NPIV clients, they limited num command alums to 256. Then they changed it back in July 2016. So you should be able to use larger values for it. Just make sure that your VIO server is set to the largest value and that it's been rebooted. Otherwise, your LPAR won't boot. This is just really going into the same thing, showing you some of the numbers. This is what my VIO server looks like. I have a V7000, so I've bumped them to this level. Now, I'm going to make a comment on MPIO because IBM has changed its recommendations for MPIO. If you are using STD PCM, you need to migrate to AIX PCM. And I have some documentation here. At the very end of this presentation, there's some backup slides in which I go through describing all the meanings for reserve policies and so on and so on. There isn't time to go into those here, but I just wanted you to have this information. But there are a couple of new commands that you might find helpful. Someone's asking me why IBM hasn't made some of these things the default. I have no idea. I just spend all my time going and changing it on my systems. So making sure that you have the right drivers, making sure your disks are set to no reserve at either round robin or shortest queue. You could check your MPIO drivers, and with the manage disk drivers -L command, you can use that to actually switch to AIX8 PCM, but just make sure that you read all the readmes that I put on the slide before. And you can also change your algorithms to round robin, reserve policy, no, etc. And if you're in and by default, the algorithm is single path and reserve policy, forget what the reserve policy is, but basically it does SCSI2 reserves, which is not what you want. So there's also a new command, LSMPIO, and what you can get from LSMPIO is if you use QL, you can actually find out the size of the disk, what its name is in the disk subsystem, and even the serial number of that disk. That can be useful if you have to do some reboots where you're not sure. You can also look and see if your paths are optimized. And then if you need to change priorities, you can use your path. And they added some new flags to the lspath command, which actually give you some statistics and so on. Again, there wasn't room in here to put a lot of that information in, but you can actually run the lsmpio-lhdisk4 with a capital S and a lowercase d, and you get about 2 pages of statistics. And then you can tell it to show you specific paths and so on and so on. Okay, now in terms of the network, we basically have link aggregation and with our network. So I typically do not use nib, which is basically where I have two adapter ports, one of which is live in the VIO and the other one which picks up if that first one fails. I tend to use an aggregate because the reason people used to use nib was because you could not do an aggregate across switches. When you're in a dual VIO environment, first of all, if the aggregate doesn't go over switches, it doesn't really matter because you've got two VIO servers. So as long as each VIO is on a different switch, you still have switch redundancy. But secondly, modern switches are much smarter, and now you can build aggregates across switches. So I tend to use both my ports, or however many ports I have in my network, as an aggregate. And one of the reasons for doing that is because then I get the full bandwidth. I don't want to have 4 network ports, 2 in each VIO, and I can only use 1 port in each VIO at a time because of nib. The other thing is that nib is very pingy, so it does build up on network traffic. So just think about that. In terms of performance, you need to pay attention to entitlement. If your VIOs are running consistently above entitlement, and the same with your clients, it is going to affect your virtual Ethernet, because your virtual Ethernet and shared Ethernet adapter performance scales by entitlement. So you need to pay attention to that. Some people like to split their VIO servers so that one pair of VIO servers is only doing the network and the other one is only doing IO. If that's the case, you can turn off threading. By default, Ethernet has precedence over SCSI. So what we do is we run them threaded, and that's the default, so that in a mixed environment, you get good performance. If you're only handling network traffic, then you don't need to be threading. These are just some things that you should think about doing, turning on large send for the virtual Ethernet adapters. I mean, this is actually done by default for you, but you might want to check and make sure that that's the case. In terms of using large receive, there were some problems with Linux and IBM I. I've got a couple of links here for you on those. The IBM I issue was resolved at IBM i 7.2, so you should be safe using large receive on IBM I now. What we used to have to do was have separate SEAs for IBM I and Linux over AIX because of this problem. But now most of it has been fixed in the more modern releases. A lot of changes after VIO Server 223, the main one being you no longer have to define a control channel. We used to have to define a virtual adapter that had a specific VLAN that we used as a control channel. Now, when you create your SEA, if you do not specify a control channel, it will basically default to VLAN 4095 for the control channel. And yes, you can have multiple SEAs on VLAN 4095. There are some setup things if you want SEA failover to work properly. Otherwise, you can run into some timing things, and I did run into this. So if you're going to use spanning tree, then you need to have port fast turned on. Port fast is a Cisco term, so if you're running IBM switches, the equivalent is spanning tree edge. So just read this this article, and it should give you an understanding of how that works. This is just talking about doing your SEA failover testing. Quick way to do it is to set the primary into standby mode and make sure the secondary takes over. But you should always do a test where you are logged into, like SSH'd into a client or SSH'd into VIO2 and reboot VIO1. And then do the same in reverse, because sometimes it's set up correctly one way but not the other. I have some starter set of tunables that I referred to earlier. I'm going to skip through a few of these. And we'll get straight into monitoring. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I've already said several times your VIO scales by entitlement. Do not starve your VIO servers. If you are starving your VIO servers, then you are affecting every client that they support. And you should never, ever let your VIO server page. And one of the things that I've found is when you get sizing studies back, or when people do sizing for these LPARs, people do not plan for the cores and memory for the VIO servers. They'll go, oh, well, I have these 20 LPARs and they need this many cores and this much memory. And then you go, well, yeah, but don't forget to add 16 gig for 2 VIO servers and 2 to 3 cores for the pair of VIO servers. And people are like, oh, I need those? Like, yeah. I run nmon monitoring on my VIO servers all the time. So I use a 24-hour one that writes to a particular directory, which is its own file system, so that if it fills up, it doesn't cause a problem. And I download those periodically and monitor them. You could also run the VIO Server Performance Advisor, because it now reports on the SEAs. Now, if you want to get accurate reporting on the shared processor pool, you need to go into every LPAR and turn on Allow Performance Information Collection. And you do that by basically clicking on the LPAR and then going into Advanced, and there's just a box you check, which can be done dynamically. Otherwise, the values that you get out of Topaz-C, nmon for the pool monitoring or lparstat aren't accurate. This is just showing you some of the things about CPU versus entitlement and so on. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is you might see that you're above entitlement and that you're using all your physical cores, but when you actually go and look, you're not using all the threads and your idle time is like 40 or 50%. That's an indication that you have too many virtual processors. So, because entitlement is basically saying you're entitled to 10 virtual processors and you're using all 10, but the reality is you're only using a single thread on each one and you've got 7 more threads on each one you could use. So just because it shows you running above entitlement does not mean that you don't have enough CPU. And that's a whole nother conversation. In terms of NPIV statistics, as of virtual version 223, you can actually get them on the VIO using the fcstat-n command. You can also use the fcstat-client, and there's the VIOS Performance Advisor also provides information on them. And the same, there's some links in here that I just found this week on SEA adapter statistics and SEA adapter failover statistics. So, plus, this last link is actually really useful because each of these is a description of what the statistics you get when you run these commands actually mean. It's been kind of hard to find. And probably one of the last things, I've mentioned virtual buffers earlier. So when I look at a virtual client, if I see on my SEA that I've got packets dropped and no resource errors, and then I go down a little further and I see hypervisor receive failures, that typically means that I don't have enough buffers to handle my network requests. Because remember, whenever you see virtual, they take memory and they take buffers and so on. So basically, you scroll down a little further in your nstat or netstat, and you'll see these virtual trunk statistics. And you'll see min buffers and max buffers, and then max allocated. So if max allocated is the same as max buffers, then that tells you that you're running out of buffers and you need to increase max buffers. Now, this is where the change comes in that IBM made at 7.2. They actually made min buffers equal max buffers. And by doing that, max allocated always shows as max buffers. So you don't know if you're running shorter buffers. And that's why I changed the setting back so that I can actually tell if I have a problem. One of the reasons they did that was because people had very, very variable buffer growth and shrinkage. And so the challenge that they had was that they didn't want to have like a low number like 512 for min and a high number like 2048. And that's fine. Make your low number like 1500 so you can at least see if you're growing and shrinking. Okay, so that said, I really want to thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful, and there's going to be a much longer, basically this will be broken into 2 sessions at PTechU where I can include some of the detail that I kind of dropped out. Hopefully, Joe, and I apologize for the audio problems. I'm having some allergy things, so my voice is a bit weird today. Back to you, Joe.
All right. Now my voice going. All right. Thanks, Jackie. Just a couple of things. You know, we're really at the end of our time here. So let me just say there were some issues with downloading the presentation. I looked, and it's been downloaded like 170 times today. So it's downloadable. So if you're having issues, it's on Box now, something I was forced to do with the new wiki. It might be an issue with a firewall that you have with Box or something. I'm going to try putting it on an FTP site and put another link in there. I'll put a second link in there, and we'll see if we can get around this if so many people are having issues with downloading the presentation.
Joe, I've actually got a link on the slide of where I've got it uploaded as well if they can't get it. But I'm going to re-upload it in the next half hour or so because I did fix a couple of typos. I'll send you a new
Yes, and then I'll download it and I'll set it up as well. And actually, maybe I'll put your link out there instead, Jackie, and see maybe they can get it off of your link easier than the Box folder. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay.
Works.
And then I'll just give you some time to upload it. So with that, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Jackie, so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And with that, we'll see you all on the next week.
Thanks, everyone.
So, and it looks like WebEx just crashed on my system. That's interesting.
I still see you.
Do you? Wow, that's okay. Well, good. Then it's not totally gone. So I really appreciate it, Jackie, and talk to you later. Okay. All right.
Excellent.
Bye, everybody.